Are you playing to win or just running out the clock? In sports, the game clock drives every decision. It creates urgency, sharpens focus, and pushes players to perform their best. So what if you treated your life with that same sense of urgency? I've created an exercise to help you do just that. It's called Your Game Clock. Download Your Game Clock today at bill-burke.net/clock. It's free, it's simple, yet transformative, and it could be the first step towards achieving peak performance in the areas of your life that matter the most. Remember, life isn't a practice run. Every second counts, and your time is now. Well, welcome to another episode of the Fortitude Forum, and I am really fired up to have Jaime Elizondo with us today as a special guest, as the next guest here on this ever-growing show. And I really want to dive into all the great things that Jaime has going on. But just to give you a little bit of background real quick on Jaime himself, he's been a football coach with stints in the National Football League, with Canadian Football League, with the XFL. So he's had a multitude of experience coaching and impacting others. He also is a performance coach now that we'll get into all the details of it and all the exciting things that he's working on with that currently. He's a soon-to-be author. Jaime, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
Bill, man, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. It's always great to connect with you and appreciate the time and the opportunity today.
Yeah, 100%. I was excited to have you on, and we've connected just late last year, but I think we've got some common ground going on back in the football world and want to dive into that a little bit and really start there because I think it's important to establish exactly what your background is. And this is going to really be music to my ears, to talk a little bit of football and athletics. Most coaches who end up in that field, not all, but most coaches who end up in that field have some sort of athletic background. So take me back to where it all started for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I grew up in Texas, and I was born in Mexico, but I grew up in Texas. And in Texas, a lot of other places, part of this country, football is king, right? And so I was ingrained into football early on. Unfortunately, Bill, I wasn't very good as a football player. So I ended up, yeah, exactly. So there's a great expression. There are no bad football players. There's just football players that aren't as good. I was one of those, right? And I ended up playing in high school, and unfortunately, that's where my career came to an end. I had an injury, surgery on my stomach. But what I actually ended up doing was, because I couldn't play contact sports past my junior year of high school, I ended up picking up a tennis racket. And look, we came from a very humble background. My stepdad was a firefighter. My mom worked as a secretary in a bank. So we didn't have the means for tennis, but I was actually better at tennis and ended up playing tennis at the University of Maryland, where my alma mater, and then ended up playing professionally for a couple years after that. But my love was always football. So that sustained me during my college years. And I knew I wanted to coach. I knew I wanted to get back into the football aspect. And I was blessed to finish my law degree. But I also knew when I finished my law degree, I made a very hard choice, Bill. And this is actually where some of the frameworks that I've developed started. I had a chance to start at a law firm at around $150,000 a year, and this was in the early 2000s. Or I could go make $12,500 coaching tight ends at the College of William & Mary. And so it was a no-brainer for me. And so I tracked down to William & Mary, and that's where the journey started.
You bring up a good point. And by the way, I am a huge tennis fan now just because of my wife. She was an all-state tennis player in high school, but it's become really my second favorite sport behind football. We're going to tournaments. She's got the tennis channel on constantly, so I love the sport. I think it's so fascinating that they're out there, and we could do a whole show on just tennis players. But I wanted to go back to the decision that you made to get into coaching, because you mentioned the monetary discrepancy there between that and being a lawyer. What was it about coaching that said, yes, I want to get into this, I want to stay in this environment or get into this environment? Was it more about just staying around the game, or was there something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've always been a teacher at heart. And so the decision for me was simple, because what I've always wanted to do was have the ability to impact people through coaching. I think it's a platform for us to elevate. And really what's always fascinated me, Bill, is how people go from high potential to that elite level of performance. What separates those elite performers? And so for me, the decision to go into coaching was really twofold. One, I just wanted to find out how good I could be, but more so, I wanted to have impact on people. And I wanted to do it through coaching, in particular coaching football, because that was my first love and something that was deeply important to me. So for me, it was an easy decision. Just this is the way I want to leave my mark on the world, to impact as many people as I can, whether that be fellow coaches or players, and obviously learn from as many coaches and other players as we can, because sometimes we learn as much from coaching others as we learn from coaching them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and 100%. Now, somebody on the outside that I've found, even since I've never really been a football coach, I've been a player for many years, but considered getting into coaching after my playing career ended. But from the outside, I know that a lot of people look at coaches, especially at the major college level or even at the professional level, and it looks really glamorous. It's exciting. You got all these big arenas, you're on TV, but I think just from where I sit, coaching at that level really is one of the most demanding and unforgiving professionals anywhere. So tell me one thing that maybe you learned once you got into it, either about the profession or maybe even about yourself, that you didn't realize going in.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we could talk for hours on that question alone. One of the things that, now looking back on it, and now that I'm coaching in a different capacity, I realize that football coaches are really, the good ones can teach business so much, because we have every minute detailed down to the hour of our day. And what I mean by that is, as you know from your playing days, when you walk onto a practice field, there is no wasted moment. We've got 10 minutes in warm-ups. We got 8 minutes in this period. We got 7 minutes in team run, and then we're going to Skelly. And every moment and everything is, I want to say scripted, but laid out to a T. That carries on into the meeting rooms. And what I mean by that is, football coaches don't have the luxury, like some other professions, of figuring it out. We can't postpone the game.
Right.
So we have to have those answers during the week as we work through different areas, whether it be red zone or blitz pickup or third down and medium, whatever those situations might be. So you have to allocate a certain amount of time for preparation of those different situations. And the great football coaches are really intentional about their use of their time, because it's their most important commodity, because they don't have a lot of it. So I think that's one of the things I took away looking back, how anybody in the business world could walk onto a practice field of a good football team and say, wow, these guys know how to use their time most effectively and productively.
Yeah, and just imagine the business world or a corporation that would view that, take that, put that, and apply it into their day and their company, how much more productive they would be. I talk about this all the time. You don't have that game clock ticking down in front of you in the game of life like you do in a football stadium. You know when the end is coming. You know when the game is over or the season's over. You know what those deadlines are. And yeah, of course, we have deadlines in the corporate business world as well, but it's just not the same when you don't have that sense of urgency to really perform at your best. And I think that's one of the most underutilized concepts in this whole peak performance thing, is just the relationship with time. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. Was there a point maybe, or even a specific player that you coached or developed a really good relationship with, that you made you realize that you could positively impact other people and affirm to you that you were on the right path and coaching is what you were meant to do?
Yeah, such a great question, Bill. There's so many coaches that have impacted me and players that have developed me, and that's what I meant earlier. You learn more about yourself in coaching than you do in coaching others. But there's a couple that really stand out. I was blessed to be in the same meeting rooms as Tom Brady, as Drew Brees. And one of the things that I took away from Drew Brees, he has a rare gift. And that gift is that he makes you feel like you are the most important thing in the world. And he does that whether you are a visiting coach like I was, the cafeteria lady that's serving us food, or the gentleman that picks up the trash in the locker room. He has a gift of being so present and being so in tune to you in that moment, that full engagement. And that really set a standard for me early in my career of trying to be that for the players that I coached. But there's been so many players along the way. I was blessed to win a championship with the likes of a quarterback named Henry Burris, who's one of the all-time passing leaders in the Canadian Football League. And there's a great story there around that Grey Cup that we can talk into if we have time. But he had that gift of reducing the pressure, of finding the fun in the moments in a very stress-filled profession. Right. Yeah. And so I think we take a little bit of something from each player, each coach that we work with, each situation, and really the good ones learn those lessons and then apply them and shift them into their own style. But those Drew Brees, Henry Burris, man, I could go down the list of people that have been fantastic, but those two guys taught me a lot about what it is to really be in a people-driven business. And that's what football is. It's not a game of X's and O's. It's a people-driven business.
Very interesting that a player taught a coach something about himself when coaches are usually on the other end and trying to impact and pour into players. So I love the Drew Brees thing. Was there one thing specifically that he said or maybe his approach that's stuck with you or stood out to you?
Yeah, I think when you're talking to Drew, and really Henry had the same quality, the only focus was on you, regardless of what was going on around his schedule. He slowed down and gave you that time of day, that moment, and he was curious. And I think that's a really good word. He was curious about you. He wanted to know about you. And I've translated that a lot into my coaching, because I think if we stop and ask ourselves, how do I want this person to feel after interacting with me? And we focus on that, then it drives our actions and our behaviors and our thoughts during that conversation. And if we can show up with that level of intentionality and authenticity, and even, I would say, even with Drew, a level of vulnerability, because the best leaders show that side. They are vulnerable, and that's tough in a very alpha male-driven sport like football. But I think that was one of the things that really stood out to me about both those guys, really.
So curiosity and vulnerability, were those the only two components of your coaching style? And maybe what were one or two other qualities that you noticed really resonated with the players as you interacted and tried to bring them up to a whole different level that maybe they didn't even realize they could get to on their own?
Yeah, great question. Energy. I'm a really high energy guy. I believe that there's a flow, and you have to manage that energy as an individual so that you can pour out into others. But when we talk about energy, there's different components of energy: that emotional energy, your mental energy, your physical energy, even your spiritual energy. And sometimes one energy affects us more than the other. So for example, if my emotional energy goes down, it drains my mental energy, my ability to focus, and might drain me physically. But that energy that I showed up with consistently, day in, day out, was one of the things I took a lot of pride in, and that was reflective in our teams and in our players. I think the second thing was the willingness to trust and ask the players for their opinion, their input, and make adjustments on game day based on what they were seeing. I've always believed that the players are playing the game. They see the game differently than a coach does. And so there were multiple times where a player would come in and say, hey, coach, they are set up for the pump bubble screen, right? We've thrown that bubble 2 or 3 times. It's perfect. And even though we hadn't practiced it during the week, we made some adjustments in games. So I think trusting the players, asking for their feedback, asking for how they saw, that really built those, on the best teams that we were on, that built that cohesiveness, that unifying sense of bringing everybody together, knowing that we all have a part and that we're all working together to find the answers through the week, through the game day. Those two things stand out for me: trust and then the energy component.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's a faith component to that too as well. When a player realizes, hey, my coach trusts me, there's some, and on your end, from the coaching standpoint, you've got to maybe take a leap of faith when you maybe don't quite agree with that call or that perspective. You got to see the big picture as a coach when you're doing that. So I love that you brought that up as well. So you had a really impressive career as a football coach. What prompted you to say, I really want to take what I've learned and start coaching in the performance space for individuals that aren't athletes but still want to reach their highest levels of performance and maximize their full potential?
Yeah, two things, right? And I appreciate the question. One is I was blessed to have a little one later in life. So I have a 6-year-old daughter, and we were blessed. We lost another one along the way, as a lot of people have. And for me, the focus was simply, I want to be as present as I can for her and be around. And that's tough in the coaching industry. You're working 16, 18-hour days for 7, 8 months at a time. it's hard to be present. So that was probably the number one motivating factor, is to be able to be around and be connected to her and have an impact on her and do all the little things that I was fortunate enough to see that some of the coaches struggled with. And by the way, as a head coach, I had an open policy. Like, you are not missing your daughter's play. If you need to leave, you got to go trick or treat, go trick or treat. If you have to come back, if you don't. So that was the way I built it when I was a head coach. But that was one component. And then, to be honest with you, Bill, the second component is the game's getting younger. There are so many coaches out there nowadays compared to when I first started, that the market is saturated. But I was enjoying having an impact on football players, but I knew that there was more. I wanted to impact not only other people and other frames of business, but the whole idea that I got into this is, if I can help coach the coaches, and what I mean by that is, I waited too long in my life to get a coach. In fact, being vulnerable and being honest, it was one of the reasons I failed as a head coach, is I never had somebody showing me my blind spots, my holes, the things that I was missing. And so for me, I thought, if I can get into this certified high performance space and put in the works and put in the reps, and I'm blessed right now to work with not only coaches, but elite level CEOs right now. I've got some Fortune 500 C-suite level executives and some companies. I travel. I've got clients all over the globe right now, which I'm blessed to have. But really, at the end of the day, my focus is on trying to help coaches be better, because if we can make the coaches better, then they're going to have that great impact down. They're going to be better coaches. They're going to coach their players better. And there's so much to this, right? In the frameworks that we coach on mindset and resilience and habits and how you use your energy, how you replenish your energy, all those things we get into. So those were the two driving forces: the desire to impact in a different area. And then my little 6-year-old, who's still to this day, I drop her off at school and she gives me a little heart sign, and then she goes, "Crush it." And then she blows me a little kiss, right? Yeah, those were the two motivating factors.
As exciting as big stadiums are, they just can't compete with the power of looking into those little eyes and hearing things like that as a dad. So I so appreciate you saying all that. And I've been lucky enough myself to experience that. So I love that you brought that up as well. And again, I think you're right. I think everybody has blind spots. We all do. Nobody really can avoid those. We're all flawed in some way. So everybody does need a coach. And that is such a hard lesson to learn. At least for me, I'm like you. I just recently have gotten a couple of coaches, but we all are like walking blind if we're going through life trying to reach higher levels, but we're not getting the help that's out there and available. And it makes no sense, right? Because as athletes and as coaches, we were in that space and we realized we wouldn't have been where we were without coaches. You mentioned the practice regimen. We wouldn't, of athletes or as athletes, wouldn't have went out there and put that plan together ourselves. We had to have a coach telling us where to be and when and how to do this technique. And so I think it's so important that we're bringing some of this coaching stuff to light. But I want to, before we move forward, because I want to hear more about your Crush It framework. And I think that's really what's going to be the driving force behind the value that the listeners get out of this episode from you. But I wanted to go back to your quarterback, Henry Burris, because I played the position and I would love to hear. You mentioned how he can dissipate the pressure, or he had that ability to do that. Can you tell us a little bit more about him as a person, as a player, and what his greatest attributes really were?
Yeah, great question. I think I call it your pinky power, right? Because I don't know if you know this, but if you lose your pinky, you lose 50% of your grip strength, which is amazing. Yeah. And so his pinky power, his strength, one of his super gifts was the ability to unite people. And because you played the position and you have this quality too, people wanted to play for Henry. He was always upbeat, high energy. He would tell you what he really thought. He wasn't afraid to have those hard conversations. But he had a gift of bringing people together and you wanting to do your best for him and for the team. And I remember there were times, and the second rare gift that Henry had, and you'll remember this as a quarterback, I use a lot of this with the people I coach nowadays. A lot of people don't know how to develop and cultivate confidence. So I remember I'm sitting with Henry one time, and it's like week 17. We have ridiculous long season up in the CFL, and we're watching film from game 3. And I say, hey, this is where you threw the interception, right? And, you didn't see that linebacker drop. It was that rare coverage that we never saw. And here it is again as we're watching on the team. And we're in the quarterback meeting room, and Henry goes, I don't know what you're talking about, coach. And go, yeah, you remember you said you just didn't see that guy? It was a totally different look we hadn't seen before. He goes, I don't remember. So the backup quarterback, Trevor Harris, who's another great human being and a really outstanding quarterback that I was blessed to work with, says, yeah, remember you came to the sideline and you said, I just never even saw that guy. He dropped from a different position. That really surprised me. And Henry turns to both of us and he goes, guys, I don't know what you're talking about. And we thought it was Henry being Henry. What Henry had done was taken all the bad memories, the mistakes, and deleted them. And that's how he continued to cultivate the highest level of confidence. And it allowed him to play to 41, 42 years of age in his career. Wow. And it's a great lesson of how we manage and release the negative memories to maximize our highest levels of confidence and performance. And so that I remember that really stood out to me about just how Henry managed, but I think he was just a great individual, good-hearted person. But that gift of being able to unite the room is, I think, what all great quarterbacks have to have.
Yeah, I love that story, and it makes me go back to my days, and I've had similar experiences, but I never related that concept to confidence. I remember having to speak to the media after a game, and they'd ask me about a specific play, and I would say I would make something up because I just didn't remember what they were talking about. But to me, that was because the play clock was winding down, and regardless of whether I just made a great throw or threw an interception, I had to look at the clock and take that next play mentality, that next series mentality. I had to forget everything that just happened, whether it was good or bad, and just move on. And I think if so many of our clients did that, instead of wallowing in what happened or celebrating our success that we just had, if we just said next play and let's move on and look forward, I think so many people would, number one, save time, and number two, perform at a higher level. But that's just a great story that I love hearing from another quarterback, because I don't get to talk to enough former quarterbacks. We've got a little bond, so I love hearing that story about Henry through you. Coaching really comes at a high price because you're faced with a ton of adversity, just seemingly endless adversity. High pressure, of course, which a lot of people aren't familiar with those types of environments. Even in the business world today, things move a little slower than they do in the big football arena. So maybe one or two other takeaways or qualities or lessons learned that overlap into the corporate world now as you work on and work with some of the executive clients that you have.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're gonna be familiar with this. But one of the things I learned early on in my career was 50% of the teams win every week, and 50% of the teams lose. Right, and so you might do everything right. I, as a play caller, might put us in the right situation, might call a great game, we might execute well, and we might still lose. And so what I focused on was developing a way to really maintain and build that confidence and that momentum by making sure that I was working through a process. And so when I say that word, very early in my career, and I was fortunate enough to work with Mark Trestman, who is a Bill Walsh disciple. And Mark established in us a very simple term. And that term actually resonated a couple of months ago where you and I connected, but that term was process over outcome. And Mark taught me early on, you've got to just worry about your process. What's your process for game planning? What's your process for teaching? What's your process for running meetings? What's your process for game planning and calling plays? What's your process for? And so developing a process for the 30 or 40 different areas that go into football, and there's probably more nowadays, was really important for me. And so we were very process oriented. And what that allowed us to do is still feel like we could cultivate the confidence and generate a win regardless of whether we won on the field or not. So by following our process, and as we look back on a loss, did we follow our process here? Yes. Okay. Was the process right? Yes. Do we need to tweak anything? Not in this area. Yes, in this area. It allowed us to really move forward and continue to grow even during challenging losing streaks, when you lost a couple games, or even difficult seasons. So as I came back with Ben Newman, he's labeled it as process over outcome. And that just resonated with me right from the beginning, because it was like, yeah, we've been doing that for years. And that goes back to the Bill Walsh lineage of just make sure you have a process for everything you do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been proven. And my guy, my mentor, my coach, Nick Saban, same thing. He made it famous. So I love that as well. All right, let's jump into it. Jamie, you've got the Crush It formula. I love the name. That's just inspiring just to say it. So I'm sure it's having a big impact on your clients. What are the core principles behind it? How did you develop it? And how is it helping people perform at their best?
Yeah, great question. And one of the things I love about the Crush It acronym started back on that ride to William and Mary on that interview when my buddy told me, hey, you're going to crush it. And I thought to myself, okay, I've heard that word, but I never really resonated with me. And then fast forward to November 27, 2016, we're in the Grey Cup Championship, the 104th Grey Cup Championship, which is, if people don't know, that's the equivalent of the Super Bowl, but in Canada. And we are massive underdogs against the Calgary Stampeders, Bill. And they've had the best record in CFL history in 104 seasons to that point. But I feel really good. And so I literally, 2.5 hours before the game, as players are doing their own thing, we're not into the structured warm-ups. And I look around and I say to myself, this is what Crush It looks like. We're about to win a championship tonight. I had Henry Burris as the quarterback, and we had a really great game plan. I felt really good. And make a long story short, right before the game, Henry comes up, is on a knee on the ground, and I go, what's up, bro? Are you okay? And he's, Coach, my knee is locked up. I can't move. And you talk about going from feeling like you were about to crush it to feeling absolutely crushed in that moment. And so as I started to move away from that game and that season, I started to say, how can we measure whether we have success away from profit and loss margins, away from wins and losses in a season? Can we develop a framework that you're crushing it in life that's not just tied to results? So I built this acronym, Bill. You know, the C in Crush It, if you're crushing it in life, you're courageous. The R stands for resilience. And those two are the ticket into the arena. They just get you onto the field. Courage and resilience. They guarantee nothing else. The U stands for unstoppable. If you're crushing it in life, you've become unstoppable, but you've done that because you've developed an unstoppable identity and an unstoppable mindset. The S is for showing up, and I attribute this to Drew Brees. And showing up means your energy, your presence, your ability to connect with others, right? How you're fully engaged in the moment. The H stands for the high performance habits, or habits if it's easier to remember. The I stands for internal discipline, and the T stands for tenacity. And now, courage and resilience get you in. Your unstoppable mindset and identity, how you show up and the habits that you've built, they might get you to the championship game, but internal discipline and tenacity allow you to win multiple championships over a long period of time. And so that's how, now the beauty of it is each one of those principles can help solve problems for our clients. Each one of those. So you can just focus on courage, and we could solve a lot for an individual. But when you put it all together, the interconnectedness of it, now you have a system for growth and development.
Have you gotten the response? Because I get this in my own practice from time to time. Now, all that stuff can sound altogether, if you look at that as a whole, that can sound overwhelming, especially for somebody that's starting at ground zero or at a very low level. How do you communicate to your clients that you can start where you are and plug in to whatever concept that maybe you feel is most important in your life or your career? How do you take somebody who wants all of those things, but really focus them in on exactly what's best for them and exactly where they need to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's where the H in the high performance habits comes in. And that has a structured framework for, like when I work with CEOs, we start with habits because it's the easiest thing to start to develop initially. What I mean by habits are not things like working out, but like these habits that were derived from the world's largest leadership study of what drives high performance. And it was a study that was conducted in over 190 countries. And they are things like clarity, energy, which is part of the showing up, productivity, influence, courage, mindset, persuasion, right? And so depending on where that person's at, we'll start with that high performance framework, and then we'll fit it into the bigger crush it part of the formula. For a lot of individuals, Bill, as you already know, it always starts with courage. And courage means something different to you than it means to me. For me, it might mean having the courage to face my fears, right? My doubts. For you, it might be having a conversation with somebody that you've been avoiding, or it might be taking action, right? And so we all have a different starting point, but the beauty of it is these principles alone are the entry point in. And we just, as coaches, we just have to find what's the one thing that, as you mentioned, where's the starting point with this individual? And so that's the crush it framework. But I think it's like we met when you first had freshmen come on and you were a senior quarterback. You got to meet clients and individuals at the level that they're at. Mm-hmm. Just like that freshman, you could talk to that freshman, or you would talk to that freshman receiver differently than you talk to your senior all Big Ten receiver, because you were surrounded with great receivers, weren't you? Didn't you have some really great ones? Yeah.
And Plexico Burst caught a game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl for the Giants years later. Harry Scott had a great tight end with great hands and played in the NFL for a lot of years. And Chris Baker, I was blessed to play with a lot of good ones.
Yeah. And so I think that's where the starting point is. The other part to this, though, I think is as you remember from the great coaches that you had, like coaching is a little bit of a self-discovery process. You have everything that you need. I just use you as an example right now because we're in this conversation. You have everything you need to be courageous. In fact, you've been courageous multiple times in your life. So what is your unique courage formula? How do you in particular generate energy? Because it's not how do you recharge? What are the things that fill you back up? And a lot of it is taking clients and helping them discover the strengths that they already have and how to tap into those strengths. And then we can start tweaking and working on the weaknesses a little bit. But a lot of times coaching is a self-discovery process.
Yeah, so very well said. And it's just making me think about the journey that we can take clients on or players on, and really the unbelievable importance of coaching in general, because you're right. So much of what a person needs and wants is already within them. And a good coach just shows them those things and makes them aware that they already have those tools usually in place, and then helps them do it on their own. Of course, do it for them. And coaching and leadership, I believe, is not about showing people our superpowers. It's about revealing theirs to them. And we all have those inside of us. And you said it beautifully. Step one for a lot of people in starting on that journey is just having the courage to look at themselves and to say, no, this is not enough for me. I want more, and I want to be better and do better and give more. So I love what you're doing. I love that formula. It's so easy to remember and so simple, but yet I think at the same time, like you mentioned earlier with the X's and O's in coaching football, it's a process. It's important to relay the idea to people that it's not going to happen overnight, and there really is no finish line to this stuff. We're all on an ongoing journey to chase the best version of ourselves. And I think that the work that you're doing is really unbelievable. And I love the fact that we've connected recently. So I'll end there. Jamie, I just want you to bring the listeners up to speed on what you've got going on, what you've got coming down the pipeline. I believe you got a book in the works. Where can people follow along with you or reach out and connect with you as well?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bill. I want to say one thing about what you just mentioned, and this is why we created the Crush It acronym. Because the challenge for all the listeners, and this was the beauty of the system, okay, how can you take the acronym and apply your own concepts to it? So how are you crushing it, or how do you crush it as a dad? And what is that acronym built out? As when I do a lot of work with leadership, what does crushing it as a leader look like? And we change the acronym. Maybe you're connecting as a leader, you're reliable, right? You're unifying. And so the power in this acronym is take it and use it as a seed in a different area of your life, and you define what crush it looks like in those different areas. And that's the true power of the formula or the acronym, but it all starts with the original one. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm excited. I've been working on 3 different things for about a year and a half now. And one of them's about to come out. The book comes out the Crush It formula on April 17th. It'll be launched on Amazon on the 17th of April. I'm excited for that. As you're an author too, and you know the work that goes into that and putting that out there. I'm really excited about the second thing though. And we now have a Crush It online course. And it's a 50-day journey. And the idea is you're going to log in, you're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes per day on personal growth. And so we break down the Crush It acronym into seven weeks. And so the first week is all the focus on courage, and there's a different focus each day. Then we go into resilience. And that the purpose of that 50-day journey is twofold, right? It's to consistently develop a habit around your personal growth. And research shows that we develop a habit anywhere between 15 to 28 days, somewhere in that ballpark, some of us a little longer. So the idea is, can you go on a journey with me for 50 days to develop that habit of constantly focusing on yourself while you're learning the Crush It framework? And then the third thing that I'm really excited about that we're about to launch on the 16th of April is the Coach's Locker Room. And I'm excited about this. This is specifically initially targeted just for football coaches. And so we've created a community and a program. I'm pairing with Keith Grabowski, who is well known for his work in the football industry through Coach and Coordinator podcast. And so we're launching a true forum for coaches, for football coaches. And hopefully that expands over time. But we're starting with football coaches because that's where our love is, to impact those guys and give them a community, give them an area for personal growth, and give them the resources to videos and so on and so forth. So those are the three things I'm working on. But as I mentioned to you before, I work with a lot of clients individually, a lot of companies, and they can always, anybody can access me. That's one of the things that I think is really important, that both our coach that we have in common has shared with us, that accessibility, that connection. That's what really matters. So anybody that can reach out to me, they can go to my website, they can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to pass them my number if you see fit. And I want to thank you for having me on, Bill. I'm excited about all these things, but more so I'm excited about the ability to have impact on people's lives and help people go from that potential that we all have inside of us and how we truly take that to where we're performing at our highest in all areas of our life.
I love it. We'll end there, and I share that commonality with you. We're both on the same mission, brother. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to seeing you down the road. Keep doing big things, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Bill.